Hello and welcome to Pathways, where you are invited to join me for a visit with leaders in personal and cultural evolution. This is your host, Paul O'Brien. We all face challenging obstacles in the search for lasting peace, health, and happiness. However, it is possible to transform suffering, fear, and insecurity in the present and find the strength and courage necessary to enjoy your life, fulfill your purpose, and be true to yourself in every situation. Relating to yourself with acceptance, honesty, and compassion is the key to self-healing, self-confidence, self-worth, and self-respect. And today's guest is here to explain how his new book can help you do that. Our guest today is Blake Bauer, author of the book, You Were Not Born to Suffer. Love Yourself Back to Inner Peace, Health, Happiness, and Fulfillment. Blake is an internationally recognized author, counselor, and alternative medicine practitioner. His book, You Were Not Born to Suffer, and his coaching work center on loving yourself unconditionally as the key to healing yourself, fulfilling your life's purpose, and realizing your full potential both personally and professionally. Hello, Blake, and welcome to Pathways.
Hi, Paul. Thank you for having me.
Now, I want to start by asking you a little bit about your personal history because your path has been a very interesting one. And so tell us, how did you become a wisdom teacher?
Well, I think honestly, I had to do it personally to survive because I was suffering so deeply psychologically and emotionally as a young man that I had to find practical tools to help me navigate life and just be able to think clearly and enjoy my life to some degree and be healthy in my mind, healthy emotionally and healthy physically, and then have that health be in my life, in my relationships and my work, my family life. So to be honest, it was really out of necessity to survive. And at that time, I didn't really know it would also help me to thrive in the world. It was really just basic survival. So like a lot of people, I grew up in a very dysfunctional family around a lot of drama and pain. And I also grew up around a lot of drug addiction and drug abuse. I lost a number of family members to drug use and drug addiction as a young man, a young child. I lost my brother just 4 years ago now to a heroin overdose. So it's a problem that's been in my family that has not really fully gone away. And so when I was a young man, I got heavily into drugs and alcohol because I thought I wanted to be cool and I wanted to fit in socially and survive socially. And I started to drink a lot and do a lot of drugs. And I had so much psychological and emotional pain that I wasn't aware of that I continued to numb out more and more and more as the months and the years went on, to the point where by the time I was 18, I had been arrested a number of times for drug possession. I got a really bad DUI for driving on Xanax, so pharmaceutical pills and alcohol, a large quantity of them, and fell asleep in front of train tracks in the middle of the night when I was 17, going on 18. So around the age of 18, I basically hit rock bottom, and I had pushed away everyone and everything that I cared about, and also everything that I identified with. So my whole ego structure and who I thought I caused it to crumble, and found myself extremely lost and insecure and confused, and didn't know how to ask for help, didn't even know that there was help, felt very alone and isolated. And then at 18, I was facing the pressures of what do I do with my life, and do I study? What do I study? Do I just go to work and make money? Is that what life's about? So all those, larger life questions of how to move forward as a young man and as a man in the world. And I was at that time just suffering very deeply in my mind and in my heart. And I knew that life wasn't meant to be like that. And I had this instinctual knowing that there had to be a way out of it, but I didn't know how. So to survive, basically, I started to search for answers and for tools that could help me, feel at peace in my heart and mind, and feel well in my body, and feel good in my life, and have a sense of clarity about why I'm on the planet and what this life is all about.
And what did you find? I mean, how did you turn that all around?
Well, I guess that's kind of a loaded question. My search took me to 5 different universities, and I kept going and studying. And I went from not caring about school, cheating in high school, and not caring about high school to becoming basically a 4.0 student at these 5 well-respected universities that I studied at. Basically, just searching for answers to how do I heal myself physically, mentally, and emotionally, and what is the purpose of my life. So I went and studied nutrition and psychology and traditional Chinese medicine, so acupuncture and Oriental medicine, um, and just continued searching for how do I be as well and happy and clear as possible. Um, and I guess, years later down the road, I started to work with people because I felt like I had acquired enough insight and skill to help people overcome their suffering in whatever form that manifested, whether that was in their body, their mind, their heart, or their life in some way. And after that period, there was still something inside of me missing. I felt that there was this clarity that I still hadn't found, or like kind of like if you had a lens and you were zooming in on something, you might feel like you're 99% zoomed in, but there's still that 1% that you don't quite have that clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And through my own journey and synchronicity, like we all follow, our heart and our instinct and our intuition, and we follow signs that we see in the world, things that kind of feel good, and we follow them because they feel like the right way for us to go, the right direction. You and I spoke yesterday about decision making. And so a series of decisions that felt in my best interest led me to a series of realizations where I started to realize that in all of my educational journey, my spiritual journey, my healing journey, all I was doing was basically looking for love and learning how to love myself. And I started, from all my training, I began to see logically and biologically how all forms of depression and disease and suffering develop in the body as a result of us never learning how to love ourselves as children.
Mm-hmm.
And that self-destructive relationship that we develop and maintain with ourselves throughout our lives leads to the stagnation of energy, emotion, and blood in the body,
Mm-hmm.
which leads to pain, depression, disease, a weakened immune system, which leads to an increased susceptibility to viruses, bacteria, toxic people, chemical toxins in the environment. And when I started to find this clarity that I had been suffering and struggling so hard to find, I just felt, in my heart that I wanted to share that with as many people as possible
Mm-hmm.
because I was so desperate to find it myself. And I felt that most people deep down who were really looking were also desperate in the same way.
Right. Well, I have to say that I'm glad you did because your book is really a great read, and I got a lot out of it. And I've read a lot of these kind of things, as you might imagine, having done this show for the last 30 years. But I have to say, your story is a beautiful example of the wounded healer archetype,
Yes.
which makes me want to bring up your butterfly metaphor that you start the book with and ask you to explain that, but also to address the point that, it seems like there must be some kind of positive value to suffering if it leads you towards healing. In other words, people who don't have very much suffering can sort of like maybe coast through life. And I wonder what you have to say about that. And your butterfly metaphor sort of addresses that too.
Yes. Paul, I'm not sure if you saw at the end of the book, there was a chapter called The Final Question. And I had gotten to this point in my own development in thinking and living and viewing the world where I had accepted a lot of the different viewpoints and theories that you find in the spiritual and self-help and personal development world, such as we're 100% responsible for our life, and that, if you blame anyone for anything or you blame any external force, you're going to stay trapped in your suffering and not have the life that you want. And ideas such as, our thoughts create our reality, like a lot of people today are familiar with the law of attraction and The Secret. And Part, some other ideas that come up as we go on this path, Paul, as you would understand too, as you I know you know in yourself, is that you also come across these ideas that we are one with the universe, we are one with God, that there's no separation between ourselves and other people, that our ego is an illusion, the idea of a separate self is an illusion. So I got to this point in my own growth where I started to ask myself this question, that if I really am one with the universe and one with God, and thus God and the universe in human form, just like you and every other human being and every other form of life on the planet, if we are one with God and the universe, and in fact God and the universe in human form, or in whatever life form we happen to take, then why would we ever create suffering? Why would we forget that we are one with the universe or one with God? Why would we create an ego? Why would we forget that our thoughts are so powerful and create our reality? Why would we ever blame anyone or anything if we knew we were that powerful of a creative force, and it all was coming from within us, and that we had the power to create everything and anything we wanted? Why would we ever choose to suffer? It's the same theological question if you believe that God is outside of you, as why did God create suffering? So why did God create famine or war or the Holocaust or
Right.
genocide? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. But of course, you're not looking at God as an external agent. You're
no.
looking at it in a much broader sense. But anyway, what is the answer?
So
Why is there suffering?
So I kept asking this question for so long because it felt like this final piece to the puzzle in understanding kind of the logic of the universe or the logic of God. And eventually, after months and months of this question playing on my mind, what came through and what I started to see that for me personally made a lot of sense was that the only logical answer to that question is that we actually choose to suffer because making the choice to cause ourselves pain, we create the essence of the lesson of learning to love yourself unconditionally, which is to forgive yourself.
Right.
So, in creating the lesson, so in hurting yourself, you create the lesson of needing to forgive yourself.
And of course,
And that,
we're making this decision, when we're at the age of 2 or 3 years old, not when we're, the wisest of beings on the planet, but maybe there is this inherent wisdom in it.
yes, I really do feel that there is, that we allow ourselves to get hurt and to experience pain in order to learn to forgive ourselves, and then that's what renders us capable of forgiving other people, because you can't forgive other people until you've truly forgiven yourself for your own mistakes and shortcomings and the pain you've caused yourself and others. So that was the primary answer that came to me, that we choose to experience suffering in order to unlock basically unconditional love and forgiveness inside of ourselves towards ourselves, and then to extend that out towards the other aspects of ourselves as other people who are not separate from us. And the other part of that is to give us, again, Paul, we talked about decision making yesterday. Again, to give us a touchstone, like this feels good, so this and this feels like pain. So basically, it provides a fork in the road. The suffering gives us the contrast to pleasure and to feeling good, so we can start to make decisions in the world every day that lead to peace and connection and health, as opposed to more pain and suffering.
Right. Now, in speaking of forgiving ourselves, one of the sources of self hatred or personal guilt is this whole concept of selfishness, which is something that we learn about at a young age. And you have a chapter 4 is entitled Healthy Selfishness. Can you explain that?
Yes, I guess, as someone who, for himself, had to realize the importance of learning to love myself unconditionally as a priority in my life, as the priority in my life, and then to feel so deeply about it and understand the importance of it for everybody's health and happiness, and then to teach it, I've attracted a lot of criticism. It's kind of blasphemous to focus so much on this idea of, you got to love yourself unconditionally as a priority. And it triggers everybody's belief systems around that being a selfish way of living, and maybe what they were taught growing up or what they saw their parents doing, their mother and their father. Um, and so for me personally, I had to reflect and analyze, the way I was choosing to live my life and encouraging other people to live their lives, and to determine if it really is and was the healthiest path to freedom for us, kind of a secular, non-religious path to freedom for anybody that was universal. And what I discovered in those kind of self-analysis and introspection on the topic was that really everybody is selfish. And in the book, I used the example of a parent and a mother in particular, but parents in general also. And I asked the question, why does anybody as a parent ever have a child? Because for most people in our society and really all over the world, being a mother or father, and it's typically associated with the mother, is the most selfless and kind of sacrificing martyr type job or role that anybody could play. And I'm not trying to devalue that role in any way, but if we analyze the truth of the situation, you will find that the only reason that a woman or a man ever has a child, even if having that child results in needing to worry about your children all the time and neglect yourself and not put yourself first all the time, if you look at the reasons why you actually had a child, it always comes back to a selfish motive, even if you weren't aware at the time that you were making a decision based on selfish motives that would take you away from yourself or challenge you or not give you time and space to love yourself. And so basically, I try to help people understand and dissect their belief systems to realize that everybody is selfish, but there are two forms of being selfish. There's healthy selfishness, which is based on an unconditional love and kindness and acceptance for yourself. And then there's the unhealthy selfishness, which is what most of us are familiar with. And that's based on the self-destructive relationship that most of us have with ourselves. And that's what we all associate with the concept of being selfish. And we associate it as being negative because we don't know any better, because our parents never learned how to love themselves, and their parents never learned how to love themselves. So they couldn't teach our parents, and our parents couldn't teach us. And so we're all struggling with the same issues and the same limiting beliefs. And so, I had to learn to give myself permission to love myself in a healthy way, to be selfish. But that has made me more selfless because it keeps my cup full and I have things to give without manipulating based on what I've given, or there being all these toxic conditions based on what I've given. Whereas when you're not selfish in a healthy way and you're selfish in unhealthy ways, everything you give is to get or to manipulate or has strings attached, because you're trying to fill a hole inside of yourself that only you can fill, but you're trying to please other people to get them to fill it. And when they don't give you what you want in exchange for what you've given them, it causes pain and suffering and issues in your relationships. So I go back to nature and I use the example of an apple tree. You know how an apple tree selfishly takes what it needs from the earth and the sun and the atmosphere. And from doing that, it produces all this shade and all this oxygen and apples for us to eat. And if we need wood for fire. So by selfishly taking care of itself, it then becomes abundant in what it can offer. And I found personally that was true in my life. And I see that with, everybody I meet and thousands of people I've worked with directly. It's just a change in perception and a change in an understanding of what selfishness really means, and dissecting it down to show that, there's a healthy form of selfishness, which none of us learned. And there's this unhealthy form of selfishness, which is what we all learned, which gives the topic of being selfish and loving yourself a negative connotation, but it's destroying the planet and it's destroying our bodies and it's destroying our relationships. And so, I'm doing what I can to kind of change the understanding and approach to those concepts.
I think it's so important because there's so much misunderstanding around the fear of being selfish, and I think it's a really skillful distinction that you're making between healthy and unhealthy. And so let's talk about the most selfish thing of all in terms of healthy selfishness, and that's the kind of the whole theme of the whole book, which is unconditional self-love.
Yes.
How do you get, what do you mean by that, and how do you get to that?
Paul, I've had to spend, my entire life trying to figure out practically what that means to, like I said, to survive and then to have an amazing experience here on the planet. And primarily what I've distilled, like, how do you love yourself? That's the $1 million question. Really, it's the $1 billion question or the $1 trillion question or it's to me, it's the most valuable answer that there is. And the answer is so simple that it's overlooked. And living in that way is so hard that we want to avoid it. And so, Paul, what I've realized that it comes down to primarily is speaking and acting based on your truth, based on what you truly feel and think in the present moment, in every moment of every day. That is actually how you love yourself, how you accept yourself, how you be yourself, how you forgive yourself. Everything that has to do with how do you love yourself comes down to expressing your true feelings in the present moment, every day, in every situation, and acting in alignment with what you really feel. And so, obviously, in order to do that, we have to learn how to become really present and understand what we're feeling and understand what we're thinking, and then learn how to communicate it in effective, clear, and nonviolent ways, which is very challenging for us, especially when you're hurt and reacting or angry and reacting. Um, and really, everything comes down to being honest, Paul, which is in my life, and I see it really in everybody, it's the hardest thing to do, to be totally 100% honest and authentic and vulnerable in every moment of every day.
Yeah, in fact, chapter 31 of your book is entitled Take the Vulnerable Path.
Yeah.
And that's what you're talking about, right?
Well, the whole book is talking about that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Now, what about the ego? You have a chapter called "The Ego is Not Your Enemy." That's
yes.
that's counterintuitive to a lot of people on the spiritual path who are meditating like crazy in order to transcend the ego.
Yes.
So, what is your take on that?
Well, Paul, if if we want to love and accept every part of ourselves, then we can't make any part of ourselves wrong. And a lot of times we condemn the ego and make it wrong, when actually, in my experience and view, it was an aspect of myself that I created to survive and to navigate the physical world, to protect my sensitive nature until I had the tools to embody my sensitive, true nature without needing the protection of the ego and fear-based protection, that I could use love and truth from my heart and through my words to protect me instead of the ego, and that I would have an awareness, such a strong awareness of my true nature, that I wouldn't need to lose myself into the delusion or the illusion of the idea in your head about who you are.
Right. Now, I like the way that towards the end of the book you make the point all love is ultimately self-love. So,
Yes.
so how does our loving other people, how does that work?
Well, I guess the inspiration for my book came from a quote or a line that I heard in my head at some point, and I don't. You could just say I thought it, or it came from my soul or my spirit, or you could say it was from the universe. It doesn't matter how you interpret it, but this is part of where the book came from. Was this line that once I love myself unconditionally, loving another becomes an act of self-love. And that really was the birth of the book, um, that actually has been out now in several editions. And the principle is that there's no separation, Paul, between you and I. So if I love and take care of myself, so my cup is really full and I have a lot to give, then I'm also doing my best for you, so that when I am talking to you or I interact with you, I'm coming from this place of fullness and kindness, and I have a lot of energy and love to give to you, as opposed to, let's say, I don't take very good care of myself and I'm not happy in myself, and I'm angry, and I'm hurt, and I'm resentful, and let's say I'm addicted to drugs and alcohol, that when I come and I talk to you, Paul, I'm probably going to be an asshole. I probably won't be very nice to be around. And so I'm basically treating you the same way I would treat myself. So if I am kind and loving and accepting to myself, that's how I'm going to treat you. But if I'm destructive and harmful and critical on myself, I'm going to treat you in that way. And then from a kind of a spiritual perspective, or even an evolutionary kind of biological, natural perspective, and a perspective based on physics, there is no separation between us. Science has proved there's no separation between the atoms that make up my physical body and the atoms that make up your physical body. And in nature, all the leading science and work today shows that we are one organism, that human beings are just a cell inside of the human organism. So, the leading edge of all thought, which I know you already know, Paul, is showing us that there's no separation between anything and anyone. And so when I love you, Paul, I'm loving myself. And when I love myself, I'm loving you. But the key distinction is, am I loving you purely and unconditionally? Like, am I giving love without any expectations or to manipulate you, or because I expect you to give me something in return? Or do I love myself so unconditionally and take such good care of myself that I have so much to give that when I give to you, I'm doing it purely because I actually want to give to you, not because I want something back from you, not because I want to manipulate you, not because there are conditions based on what I've given you. And as human beings, I think, since the beginning of time, we've grown up and been conditioned by the context of conditional love.
It's such a beautiful distinction, and the whole book is about how to do that. And we could talk about this for so long, because you've got so much information in this book. And I'd like to talk a lot longer, but we've basically run out of time. I wonder if you have any last thought or advice for our audience today.
Yeah, I guess I would just say to those listening, life is really short, and today, this day is all we've got. And I really encourage you to express how you feel and act in alignment with that today in every situation and relationship. So basically kind of stop lying to yourself and to others and really just speak and embody and live your truth, because, this life is too precious to waste. And, love is truth and love is honesty. Even if you think you're trying to protect somebody else, you're really just selfishly protecting yourself, but you're keeping yourself stuck and miserable and sick. So
okay, well, we've got to leave it at that. But there's so much more in your book, and I want to tell our listeners about your website, which is unconditional-selflove.com. That's unconditional-selflove.com. And for those who tuned in late, this is your Pathways host, Paul O'Brien, author of Great Decisions, Perfect Timing, a book that shares the theme of Pathways, which is personal and cultural evolution. In a second, I'll tell you how you can rewind and replay this entire interview anytime you like via the internet or podcast on iTunes and other servers. Today, we have been visiting with Blake Bauer, author of the book, You Were Not Born to Suffer. Love Yourself Back to Inner Peace, Health, Happiness, and Fulfillment. I want to say thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in to the Pathways interview program, which is broadcast and streamed via KBOO.FM Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. USA Pacific Time. Podcasts of today's show, which you can listen to and forward to others, are available for free at divination.com, spelled D-I-V-I nation.com, and on iTunes and other podcast outlets anytime you want. This is Paul O'Brien reminding you to tell your friends about Pathways Radio and podcasts. And thanks again to Blake Bauer and to all of you listeners for tuning in and being a part of the Pathways experience.